Well, it's officially that time of year. And no, I'm not talking about Tishi or Chinese Valentine's Day, or my birthday for that matter. Nope, it is budget season. Let's get to it. Welcome. Another fabulous episode of IBF On Demand. I'm your Dave Ramsey of business planning and host, Eric Wilson. You can find me at eric@ibf.org. That's eric@ibf.org. Thanks for the followers and subscribes. Follow me on LinkedIn, please. Find me on LinkedIn. I share a lot there. You can also follow on YouTube as well, almost up to that 10,000 mark. And wherever you get your podcasts, follow me there as well. I know a lot of people listen only on a lot of streaming services, so follow me there as well. And while you're following people, go check out Arkiva. Thank you for being our sponsor, Arkiva, driving business transformation by solving what others cannot. Thank you, Arkiva, very much. I was recently talking to someone special, and she mentioned that the budget cycle was starting soon. This not only brought back some painful memories for me, but she became the muse for my topic that you're going to hear today. So, this episode is dedicated to you. Yes, this is budget season. This is about the time of the year when most companies generally start the painful process of their annual budget. Generally starts on August for a lot of companies, which is when it used to start for me, and will extend on. Most companies, between August and some next February, this is, I said, the painful process where we're creating outlooks, next year's strategy, and hours of unnecessary meetings. That's the season we're in now. This endless cycle of putting together a plan and then replanning it and replanning again until we finally get sign off. When we're already into next year, annual year, we're already then going to finalize the budget for that year. Kind of a lag zero approach in our budgeting and forecasting process. So what does the budget cycle look like for some companies? As I said, a lot of companies, it's going to start in August. And most of the time, it's going to take a couple of months, and they're going to try to finalize it by an October or November type of finalization, preferably before like Q4. But for other companies out there, what they're going to see is the process is going to start in August, take a few months creating it, and then November, they're going to get new information, and people didn't like it, so they're going to start another version. Then by the end of January, you're still finalizing with Rev Q or Rev X at that point, which is the final budget. And admit it, everyone has that Excel spreadsheet out there that instead of saying the final version, it says final version. Admit it, you have that version in your Excel documents right now for a budget. You've been there. I've been there. We've all been there. And the worst part about it is we go through all this process of creating our budgets every year. And then by March, for a lot of organizations, it's obsolete. What they're doing, definitely by mid-year, they have a revised outlook, and they're comparing their forecast to this revised outlook, and then they will make a comparison to budget, but most of the attention is then on this revised outlook, and less attention goes to the budget throughout the year. So we're going through months of process, hours of meeting, only for a lot of organizations it to become obsolete 3 months later. Now, admittedly, some people, I've worked with some organizations, I've talked to some organizations, they have the budget cycle down pat. For them, it's a 3-day meeting to discuss, and they make a finalized plan. Within a week, they have a finalized plan. Of course, at the other end of the spectrum, there's the companies that come out with the 200-page budget books. Yeah, I've seen those as well. They get produced and require, I said, months of meetings to be able to get there. no matter where you are, they generally follow a similar type of format to get there. From my experience, what I've generally seen is it starts with a series of plans, demand plans, business forecasting plans. Generally, these are sales. You're going to have some type of sales forecast, financial forecast, and those need to be reconciled at some point. Depending on your varying levels of maturity, depending on the structure and the processes you have in place, depending on how good of planning processes and business forecasting you have, they vary based on how you get there. But generally what we're seeing as a starting point is some type of reconciliation between what sales are going to do and what financial says we're going to do or what they want to happen as well. That reconciliation is going to happen. For some, it could be a complete top-down. For them, it's going to be, hey, we want to see a 5% growth. We want to see a 3% growth. And top-line forecast of where we see across the board that growth happening. Or it can be a little more maturity and a little more rigor or more science is put into a financial top-down type of plan, saying, well, this is going to grow this is going to grow that, and we're bringing some of that in. And I said from the top down, it's exactly that. It's top line financials or enterprise type of numbers that is then de-dollarized or turned into sales plans of what we see sales going to do. For others, we see it from a bottoms up. This is where you have a pure sales driven or a pure item level type of forecast created. I said based on the level of maturity, whether it's sales creating their outlooks based on their book of business or a planning function really driving a forecasting process and what they see at an item level volume type forecast that is then reconciled with sales before it is reconciled with financials. But here it's a bottoms up and it's done at a detailed sales or item level and then aggregated up to reconcile to what a dollar views are going to be. Whether it's going to be a top down or bottom up, I said it varies based on the organization. But generally the first step in any budget process is some type of reconciliation because we really need both views. We really need that top view at a business unit, enterprise unit. We need a top level view to be able to do some analysis, but we also need to be able to bring it down to the lowest level to understand impacts, capabilities, rough cut capacity, things of that sort as well. Because we operate a lot of times in a volume world as far as production, inventory. Those are really a volume type of world. Budgets are a financial world where they're looking at the health of an organization, financial cash flow, financial expectations. So the first step is reconciling those two worlds together. And I said sometimes top down, sometimes bottom up. More mature organizations, it's going to be some type of middle out approach then as well that can really balance and reconcile those two approaches. That's step one. Step two in our process then are the plans are then used to help both of those. Top line as far as a view of what growth's going to look like, a view of what, if we're going to be able to look at cash flow, a view of what we're going to be able to manage the expectations of shareholders. That's from a top line. The other is from a volume perspective. Operations can use that volume forecast, then provide some type of cost estimation. This is both fixed and variable. And just like the same way we had a reconciliation of sales volume to business unit financials, we have a reconciliation that's going to happen here as well. We can create plans financially of what we want cost to be, what we want margin to be, what we want our estimations to be as far as our cost reductions or cost expansions. All those can be done financially, but then also if we have a good volume-based plan, those are aggregated when we develop our volume estimates of operations. Those can be aggregated up into dollars as well. Those two need to be reconciled as well. So now we have our revenue plan and we have our cost. These are the two components we're looking for in part of a budget process. A lot of times what you're looking at, though, when that reconciliation, the same way we have financial revenue projections of, hey, we want to grow at 3, 4, 5%. We have cost mandates as well. We don't want to grow costs beyond this, or we want to reduce costs to this. So a lot of times during this budget process, a lot of mandates are then given to different types of business unit, different types of operations of what type of cost savings. In our book of cost saving recommendations or estimates, those are generally given as well. So now we have our top line revenue, we have our costs, and we have our book of here's different things we're going to do to be able to reduce the cost. Here's our different projects we're going to put in place. Here's different cost estimates we're going to be able to reduce or show savings with these type of improvements. Those are calculated in then as well. So all those things now are reconciled top down, bottom up, revenue and cost, and we now have comparable views that we then can go into. The last thing we're missing then a lot of times for our this is just the first pass of our budget cycle. A lot of things we're then missing now are some of those capital. Another thing that's looked at and addressed early on in our process is capital budgeting. Capital budgeting is going to look for approvals or which ones are going to be put into the budget for the next fiscal year. So we have a lot of budgeting happens here, not only capital, but other types of expenditures. Training, how much we're going to put into the budget for training, how much we're going to put into the budget for that new system you want, how much you're going to put into the budget for travel, conferences. And by the way, this is the time with 2025, start asking for some budget for training, for conferences, because halfway through the year, you didn't have it in the budget. That's when you're begging to be able to go to that conference. This is the time where you start asking for some of those expenditures. You're going to ask for that extra head count. You're going to ask for those, here's are the needs or the wants that I have for 2025. It could be, a new system. It could be some consulting dollars you want to do for a project. It could be projects. It could be a capital expenditures for a manufacturing. It could be warehousing. You want to expand space. All those things become some CapEx type expenditures that you have to be able to justify. And here's where you want to be prepared and not just throw it in. You want to be able to bring in your ROI for it, potential, how long it's going to take to pay off for it. How are the other aspects as far as the revenue and cost? Your cost savings may play into this. Revenue growth, where some of the other budget items, how do you justify the capital expenditure that you may have? Including that, I said, can be training, can be other things as well. This is where you're laying out all your wish list for those numbers. So then what happens through this process? The same way we had other reconciliation here, whoever has the most clout or can sell their project the best or has the best way of finagling the numbers, generally is going to get a line item in the budget going forward. So do your homework, be prepared going into this. If you have a wish list, be prepared to sell it. Be prepared to come in with an argument or a reasoning to why this should be in next year's budget. This is the time to put it in during this process. So once we've made all of our estimates, we have a rough estimate of our annual income. We have a rough estimate of our annual expenses. We've scrutinized these expenses. We've scrutinized the capital. Once we've done all that, we now have in essence, a draft of our P&L is what we end up with. Now we have a new top-down type of number that includes cost, that includes resources, that includes all that is from the needs list, includes the capital, what we need to grow, what we need to cut, how we need to save, where do we need to expand upon, where do we need to do. This gives us a rough estimate of our first pass or our draft P&L becomes our first major output now of our budget cycle. This then, unfortunately, or some companies, they look at the reason they do this is it becomes the targets. Out of this becomes targets. Targets are set for sales. Targets are set for cost. Targets are set for growth. Targets are set for inventory. And all these targets are then pushed down to the different business units, to the different divisions, to the different functions. These targets are then pushed down based on the new top line view of the total revenue, cost, resources, everything that's decided and was scrutinized. That new view is pushed down as targets that everyone has to go after, or what they're going to be held to in the next fiscal year. From there, though, questions are generally pushed back up, because all these targets are set at top based on total views. When you start breaking it down, in essence, to get where we need to do, what you need to do is start robbing Peter to pay Paul. It becomes a shell game at this point because these targets are unrealistic. There's no way I'm going to get that, but these, I can take a little bit away from here, add to this. Now together we can hit that target. So we begin this shell game exercise is the next step in a lot of companies' budget process. To be able to rejigger these targets to come up with how we can hit the top line numbers. Or push back because it's incapable of getting these, I need to be able to have a little more wiggle room here. So the finagling happens there at the lower levels and working back and forth to try to figure out how we're going to be able to hit. This becomes a vicious cycle for a lot of organizations. And the reason why some companies do it over a week and some companies do it over the course of 4 or 5 months, because of that back and forth of we have what we want, but bottom it, when we disaggregate, it no longer makes sense. And we're trying to make it make more sense. There's a lot of inefficiencies in that. Right now, the average billion-dollar company will spend as many as 25,000 personal days per year putting together a budget. Yes, 25,000 personal days of people's work of putting together budget. And think about some of those days are executives. The cost, if you looked at man hours alone of putting together budget, I guarantee you for most organizations, there is no ROI there in a traditional budget cycle. Other things are along with the budget as well, is we are going to motivate bad behavior. Fixed performance contracts is in what you want. I said, you end up with targets. That is a fixed performance contract. Now, companies live and die by these targets they set at the beginning of every year that they have to hold inventory, revenue, sales, forecasting, everybody to. And that becomes a fixed performance contract that doesn't adapt to what you're seeing. That can motivate bias. It can motivate bad behaviors because the unknowing consequences sometime of some of those targets you set, and it doesn't adapt to the new and create new behaviors that may benefit your organizations better. The targets for sales, cost, key ratios, they're all spelled out in a budget cycle, and there's an implicit contract, and it creates pressure. It creates bias, I said, and motivates unwanted behaviors and unwanted actions sometimes. The other negative sometime of this whole budget cycle we're going through is there is a big difference between targets and what a forecast should be. And people start to confuse those two. A lot of times it pushes the forecasting process. It pushes the business forecasting, demand planning. It pushes all of you towards targets, which is sometimes gives a false view of what is the actual is going to happen. It makes decisions for an organization based on a bias or unrealistic expectations, either too high or too low. You may be missing out on risk, or you may be missing out on opportunities by pushing a forecast towards a target. Those two should always be something totally different. A forecast needs to be as unconstrained and unbiased as possible. Part of being unconstrained and unbiased is showing what the market wants, what the market would be able to sustain. That's what you want. Why do we want that view from a forecasting perspective? Because our business decision may be a target that is less than that because we made business decision because we're not going after some of that business. The answer is sometimes no. But for us to make those decisions through a budget cycle, we need the unconstrained forecast. And unfortunately, what gets wrapped up into a lot of budget cycles becomes targets, and those forecasts are driven towards targets instead of the other direction. So make sure that when you lay out your process, you really try to maintain the unconstrained view of your forecast. The other reason why there's a lot of dangers here in our forecasting and budget cycles is it's simply wrong. It rapidly becomes obsolete or out of sync to the strategies, to operations, what the market is seeing. Days afterwards, we're already out of sync. And without a process to really continuously sync it up, it's just flat out wrong. There's a lot of reasons why you shouldn't do budget. So basically, I went through the budget cycle, aligning the revenue, aligning your operations, filling in the capital, aligning from a top down, and then synchronizing those to, the shell game that goes on. That's our budget cycle. But basically, I hate to say this, and the person who originally I talked to about this, she's going to hate hearing this as well because nothing she can do about it. So maybe your boss's boss can hear this. But frankly, budgets, there may not be a place for it anymore. It may be the time to do away with the budget cycle as we've known it for the past few decades. We need to find a new solution to budgeting. And guess what? There is some solutions out there. So I'm not just going to tell you about the problems. Let me give you some solutions in the last 8 minutes of this podcast. First of all, goals should be based on longer term external benchmarks, not targets. If we can orientate ourselves, the organization, our goals, our focus as functions, and our focus as business units, our focus as organizations to longer term external type benchmarks instead of internal negotiated annual targets, we're going to do a lot better. Those fixed type of targets, guess what? We need to rethink that. We need a way to adapt to the market and orientate ourselves towards external benchmarks and business that we want to create as far as strategies. That's how our goals should match the strategies. Our strategies should match how we position ourselves in the market and what our business models are. That's how we need to structure our goals, not set targets. The other thing we're going to look at is maybe a zero-based budgeting. We're hearing a lot more about zero-based budgeting as an opportunity to replace the budget cycle. It replaces them with a system of a rolling type of forecast of key performance indicators, those goal-based indicators that we can then bring into that process. It shifts the strategic decision-making to more of a customer-facing type of organization where we're really adapting to more of a demand-driven type of organization that is more of a market-driven than organization as well, that we can adapt on a monthly cycle. We can look at this from a total zero, redoing the budget cycle almost entirely. A lot of FP&A processes are already on board on that, and we're seeing a lot of FP&A processes really drive a zero-based budgeting and replace the annual budget cycle that we know of today. One of the main things you can do, and if that sounded awful familiar of pretty much looking at your forecast and a rolling forecast and adapting to new strategies and new capabilities of optimization, if that sounds familiar to you, it should, because that is also what we see in the tenets of a mature S&OP IBP process. S&OP IBP is not about balancing supply and demand. It's not just about volume based. It's not a functional process. It is a business process to align all functional areas around a unified set of assumptions for coordinated decision making. It integrates financials into volume. It reconciles that on a monthly basis and adapts to the strategies and goals of what best meets the organization's needs. What we're talking about is a new way of doing things is not a new way of doing things. It's just doing things better. There's already a process and template in place for you. It's called sales and operations planning, integrated business planning. I don't get hung up on the terms, but that is what can be utilized to replace an annual budget cycle where you're bringing in a new view of what sales are going to do from it, volume and dollars on a monthly basis at your extended planning horizon. So out where you can actually make decisions for capital expenditures and other types of decisions. You're bringing this in and you're optimizing your response. You're bringing in an optimized response where you can figure out what's going to not only be best for the customer to respond to consumer needs, but also what's best for the business needs as well. You can integrate that into your financial views and make executive decisions. And by the way, did I mention we're bringing in brand strategy in here? We're bringing in channel strategy. We're bringing in our fulfillment strategy to all align to our executive strategy that then helps make better business decisions. This is a monthly process that not only eliminates, but it improves your budgeting cycle and makes it more of a rolling process, goal-oriented, demand-driven, zero-based budgeting type of process that it could occur inside your organization. You want more information about that? Guess what? Yes, I did write an entire book about that with Aman. We wrote a book about this, Practical Guide for Sales and Operations Planning, S&OP IBP. It really lays out exactly that process. No matter if you're an emerging, early on, essential, next level, vanguard, whatever level you are, from a people, process, technology, analytics, KPIs, financial, it lays out all the different aspects you need from a resource standpoint. Check it out. It's a great resource for you. 40% of this book is written by other authors, subject matter experts in the field. We compiled the best practices in one handbook for you, or practical guide for sales and operations planning, S&OP IBP. Check it out. I think it's going to be a great resource for you. It's going to help you understand how S&OP can be utilized as a great tool to replace your S&OP, your budget process right now. And as an example, we have great things as far as financial metrics in S&OP, how to integrate your KPIs into financials. All those things are part of this book then as well. So check that out at ibf.org, Amazon, wherever you get your books. Practical Guide to Sales and Operations Planning, S&OP IBP. Not really a sales pitch for it, but it really does replace a budget cycle because I think we've outgrown the life of our budget. So with your budget cycle, I know we're getting ready to start it. Feel sorry for you. You have to go for the next few months. Hopefully show this podcast to your boss's boss, buy them this book, say, hey, there is another way we can do this. There is another approach that people have proven work better. And if they have any questions, have them talk to me. I'll tell them that as well in person. Well, that's a wrap. I'm going to go make sure I'm hitting my budget and get ready for Tishi, the Chinese Valentine. My name is Eric. You can find me at eric@ibf.org. That's eric@ibf.org. Thank you, Arkiva, for driving business transformation by solving what others cannot. A great sponsor, been around for 99 episodes now. We got one more before we hit the magic 100. So make sure you tune in a couple weeks. Check out that one then as well. Thank you, IBF, for being a resource through this, providing those resources. There's great content out there about budget cycles, about rolling forecast, about everything we talked about S&OP. So everything we talked about here, IBF is a resource for you on that as well. Check out ibf.org for resources there. Check out my book. And remember, doing this budget cycle can be a long, dirty process. So please don't forget, wash your hands.